Welcome back to the JSIG Privacy Deep Dive. I am Larissa Munteanu, and in this episode, I am joined by Mark Povey, colleague and technical director at JSIG, where we take a deeper look at data protection and the challenges of email use in the workplace.
This is the JSIG Privacy Deep Dive.
Hello everyone, we are very happy to have you here today to our latest episode of the JSIG Privacy Deep Dive podcast. On today's episode, we'll be talking with Mark Povey, who is the technical director of JSIG and my colleague, and we work together as a data protection team. Today's topic will be a very interesting one. We'll address the issue of email considered a threat, data breaches, and even cyber crimes. So to begin with, Mark, do you think that email is still used nowadays as a frequent communications channel?
I think that email is actually used too much. People have become reliant on it for the most simplistic of things. And the issue with this kind of thing is by using it too much, it allows us to make more mistakes than we would do if we didn't rely on it as much as we did.
And what about the other platforms that are available nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, your social media platforms are getting used in business more and more, but it's still around the running of the actual business itself in terms of getting information from one person to another. Email is more or less the go-to solution.
Even if we can send attachments on social media or maybe different chat platforms, is that still the case? Do you think there are some criteria that make email more suitable?
It's familiarity. Mm-hmm. People have been using email for a long, long time. And as the workforce moves along, people are happier using email. Yes, more and more people are setting up Teams chats, Zoom calls, and attaching data to it. But if your company director needs the financial report from the financial team, especially with this era of home working, are they going to send it through a Teams chat or are they going to send it as an email attachment? They're going to go with the email attachment more often than not, even though, as we know, working through a platform such as Teams and others, you can be more collaborative.
Yeah.
But people are slow to move to that.
Yeah, and at the same time, I think we get one question quite frequently now. The question whether email communications are covered by GDPR or not. And it's a funny one, I know, because we know both UK and EU GDPR don't create such delineations between email communications and physical communications, or between official communications that are sent via email and the reports that are online, etc. So the interesting point to address here, I think, it's about the material and the territorial scope of these legislations. Now, of course, the material scope is the one that touches more upon the points that we'll address today. And the most suitable point to discuss here is the exception that the GDPR is not applicable when we process data for purely personal or household activities. And I know many people have the wrong impression when they apply this exception, because there's a misunderstanding on what purely personal actually means. Yeah. So it could be that you and I want to meet for a coffee and I'm sending you my current location so that we can meet to a cafe near me. That's a purely personal activity that won't be covered by the GDPR, of course. But what if, for example, I want to publish a photo, a humiliating photo of a colleague out of revenge? That I can argue that's purely personal because it's my revenge towards my colleague, but it's not covered by that exception. And what is even more important here to notice is that we're actually covering not only GDPR and other data protection laws, but also criminal laws, because that enters the sphere of cyber crimes. And
absolutely,
that's one of the most impactful threats nowadays, even when we use email. Yeah,
people forget. I mean, you and I talk about this often. I believe email to be a very, very dangerous thing.
Oh, yes.
With my history, I was a soldier for 11 years, and communication was a natural part of my daily activity. And we always had to consider what it was we were doing, what information were we sharing, what were we sending. And that hasn't changed. Email is just a new form of what it was I was doing when I was much younger and had more hair. We're literally in a situation now where we don't quite often think about what is going to be the outcome from that email. And there are many things that can go wrong. And so actually using email maliciously, as you said, to publish a nasty photograph or something else, it's still a crime. Even though it's been done on the internet and it's a load of ones and zeros, it's still a crime, and it can still harm people, and ultimately can lead to criminal charges, not just charges under GDPR and the DPA in 2018. So, you do have to think about how you use email.
But from your experience, what do you think are the most frequent types of data breaches that, let's say, you have encountered with your clients and with our clients?
So the key one, obviously, is Friday afternoon 2:00 special.
Yeah, great.
So that can be attendance reports for the week, who was off sick. It can be financial reports, people's payroll. And it's quite often the case that the individual concerned that send the email, there's no malice in there. They're just under pressure to get this information to whoever needs it, get it to the payroll company, get it to the director who wants to check on the health reports and all the other stuff. And they will rush. And unfortunately, rushing is definitely the path to failure. So they will pick up somebody's name, and it may just be one letter difference, but that name will then go to somebody else. And often we'll get, well, that's okay, Mark, because we've used encrypted technology. So we've gone through the encryption system. Yes, but by sending it through encryption system the way you have potentially, you've actually authorized the incorrect person to access that very sensitive health data. And again, it's because people are like water. They want to go to the quickest way possible. So they've got to get this stuff off the desk. They've got to get it out. So they send it quickly. They don't give themselves that pause. Should I be sending this data out as an attachment? Is there a better system? Has my IT team initiated a portal where I upload the data and only the people such as you and I have access to it? So we cannot cause the data breach with unauthorized distribution. People are sending, certainly an experience from some of the past roles I've had as a virtual data protection officer, health records. And they're using distribution lists, and they don't check the content of the distribution list. So they're sending health records, and it might be people who've got mental health problems. It can be bus drivers, train drivers who've had crashes. And all of a sudden, all of that information, which, yes, is required by the people that administer what goes on around the team. But remember, one of the key principles of GDPR and DPA 2018 is data minimization and purpose limitation and all the other things. So by using a distribution list, have we spent the time with our IT team to ensure that that distribution list is up to date? Only people allowed to access that information are on that list. Has our joiners, movers and leavers system been put in place correctly? So when a person leaves a company, are they removed from distribution lists? Because all of these things can and will lead to data breaches.
Absolutely.
And as we'll come to later, you can finish up actually being held against criminal charges as an individual working on behalf of a company.
Yes. And in this case, would you recommend companies in general to avoid using distribution lists?
Yes. As you and I well know, I battle quite hard with our client base not to use distribution lists.
Yes.
Because people forget stuff. We all do it. We've all got to deliver our work for the day. We've all got to make sure that we achieve the expected results. And so we will rush. And time and again, we've seen the 2:00 Friday afternoon effect.
Yes.
And that goes across any industry that we're involved in, whether it's be education, whether it be transport. People are always pressurized. When we're talking about the culture of an organization, we try to instill, please only send emails as you're leaving the office on a Friday if it is an emergency.
Yeah.
Because as we know, and we'll come on to phishing and all the rest of the stuff around emails and breaches, MD sends you must pay this invoice now, otherwise we're going to lose the contract. And we've seen that happen. And we've actually seen trained DPOs fall for that trick because they're rushing to get the stuff done.
Yeah.
So going around having a second course of validation, hello, James, are you sure you need this information now? On the telephone.
Exactly.
The telephone's been around 140 years nearly now. Very rarely crashes. And we'll know the person who's at the end. So we talk about multi-factor authentication all the time. And it's great stuff, but it needn't be dually digital. It needn't be through your email package. It can be an email and a phone call, an email and a text message. Because data privacy and data protection, it's about discipline. And, we talk when we're training our clients about accountability. And the way it sort of filters down from the regulation is it's accountability of the business, the directors of the business, the people that are telling us as employees what to do. But we have to be accountable ourselves because we are privileged to be handling personal information of our data subjects, of our fellow workmates, of the students in our class. And I think that gets overlooked. But we have to be accountable to these people. So we have to treat that personal information as if it was our own. So when we attach a sickness list around a classroom, what are we doing? Well, we're sending very privileged information to somebody. And as we know, they may finish up being in the wrong inbox. So again, what we have to do, we have to think about how we put that information into the email that we're sending. Can we encrypt it? If we can't encrypt it, then we shouldn't email it. So, businesses will quite often look at cost. Oh, that's very costly.
Yeah.
Don't think we can afford to implement that. Well, it's going to be a lot more costly if they breach special categories of personal data, and it could be a whole college, for example. Yeah. And 30 of the students in the college may have mental health issues. So that's all in those documents, and they've been sent in the clear. So, you could be the person that sends it. So you'll reach out to the people that receive it and say, excuse me, ever so sorry, I made a mistake. Can you delete that document and confirm it to me? Whilst you've taken measures, is that satisfactory? No, it's not. So again, we have to think about accountability, and accountability of the business, the accountability of the organisation, and the governance. So, as we know with PDFs, for example, and other documents, we can encrypt them. So why not, as an organisation, make the decision, if you're going to email files that contain personally identifiable information, and indeed financial data, business-sensitive data, it's still important. What is the fallout if somebody who isn't authorised to have that content receives it? It's quite serious.
Absolutely.
It could, you can be upheld against the regulations, but you can also be upheld against business regulations. There could be loss of business. You could give away industry secrets by mistake. So is the justification that ordering a PDF encryption package that's £15 a seat really justifiable? No.
Shouldn't.
Train your staff how to use the products, purchase them, license them, rent them, however your commercial model works, and ensure that when information has been sent as attachment, it's encrypted. But make sure you use a form of multi-factor authentication when you're sending this information out. So don't send it to an authorized receiver because the system authorizes itself. Make sure that the PDF or the Excel file or the Word file that's encrypted reaches the party concerned with a notice on, hi there, here's what was requested. please contact me, text me to receive the password or the decryption key or the certificate. That makes it far more secure.
Yes, and to add to what you just said about distribution lists and sending emails in the clear, I think we have very striking examples where organizations, like very important organizations, were fined for sending such emails, of course, by mistake.
Yeah.
So 2 of these cases happened in the UK before the GDPR was enforced.
Yep.
So in 2015, there was a clinic, part of the NHS Trust, that sent emails to hundreds of patients about a newsletter on HIV treatment.
Yeah.
So only 10% of the amount of people that received the email did not have the full name in the email address. That resulted in a £180,000 fine by the ICO. Yeah. And that took into consideration a previous incident where the same clinic sent a questionnaire to patients, again, using the to field instead of the BCC one that hides the rest of the emails that are receiving that message. The second episode that is very similar to this one happened in 2017. And again, there were emails sent. There was an email about a public hearing sent to 90 recipients by the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse. So the recipients were all considered a vulnerable category of data subjects by the ICO. Mm-hmm. And in this case, the fine was £200,000. So quite a lot, but that's because, again, of the nature of the vulnerability of the data breach and the impact that has occurred there. Another interesting one, but of a different nature, not about having emails that are sent in the to field, happened in Australia. And this one happened, as you gave an example before, because of a typo in the email address. So there was an investigation about a senior official of the state, and the email from the whistleblower was sent containing sensitive data and sensitive information to the wrong person because of a typo, a wrong letter in the email address. So it can always happen to anyone, really. And we've seen these examples with important public authorities that have sent emails and caused data breaches, of course, by mistake. It's human error. And we've seen it in our experience that it's the most frequent cause of data breaches, really.
Absolutely. It is. And the managing of it really has to be from very high to the very lowest in the organization. Nobody is exempt, and nobody is perfect. So we have to really consider all of those risks and how we go about, as an organization and an individual, mitigating those risks as far as we possibly can. So it comes back again to discipline, techniques, technologies, because these data breaches are happening all the time. You know, on a daily, weekly basis, people are missending email. They are adding attachments that shouldn't be there. They are sending emails to the wrong email address altogether. They're relying on Outlook's autofill on the email address. And as we've seen time and again, the autofill, whilst looks very assistive, is actually quite harmful because you don't check. We need to slow down. You know, everything these days is a million miles an hour. We need to slow down. You know,
as you said, since no organization is perfect, it's a very, very good point, because we sometimes hear from clients that we want full compliance, perfect compliance. That's a dream, that's utopia, because it's not possible. It's not possible given the regulations that we have, the standards that we need to adhere to, and how fast things move, as you said.
Absolutely. And as time moves on, it's only going to get more and more complex. As you and I are aware, the EDPB is talking about enhancing child's data, so creating categories around children's data.
Yes.
So an organisation that processes children's data, a learning environment, a nursery environment, all of these different will have to pick up with that. They will have to align their training, their actual structure of the organisation will have to be rethought. So as you achieve a standard, that standard usually changes. And that's why we like the approach of effectively working to an ISO, which is continuous improvement, continuous evaluation. Is the technology that we've put in place adequate? Is the staff training that we've put in place adequate? Are there tools that we can bolt on to bolster our footing in terms of privacy regulations and in terms of business regulations?
And are there any other protective measures that you can think of right now besides training? And you can also detail about the importance of the training for organizations to be ready to have in place all the adequate security measures.
There are actually technologies that will, in effect, hit a pause. And what happens is that as you prepare to send that document, the technology will check and it will see that you've got PII in the clear. It will see that you've got attachments that may or may not contain PII. So it will flag and it will say to you, are you sure you want to send this information in the clear? So it enforces that slowing down that we just talked about.
Yeah.
So there are quite a few technologies that do that. We've talked about using encryption techniques. We've talked about training. All of these things are not standalone. They complement each other. So we have to consider that as business leaders, as company directors, as heads of IT departments, as chief of information security. All of these people have some responsibility towards it.
Absolutely.
And as we've seen, just as we talked through, email is quite often the weak link in the chain.
Yes. And given the frequency of phishing attacks nowadays, you mentioned it as well, I think a huge part of a training package should focus on phishing attacks, how to prevent an organization from having a data breach that occurred because of phishing attacks, how to identify a phishing attack. Could you add more examples of phishing attacks and how they occur, how we can identify them in practice?
Well, I think someone very close to us has a personal experience of that, where he received a phone call from his mobile phone provider, an email from his mobile phone provider. Yeah. You spent too much money. We think you spent too much money on your credit card while you were away. Please click this link and we'll walk you through it. Now, that was an attack to try and steal credit card details.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, financial loss, credit card details, which, as we know, are personally identifiable information. Lots of things can happen. And quite often now with phishing on the whole, it's not just got one, they're not desiring one outcome. They may well interfere and steal money from your bank, but in the next thing, they may actually sell your details to ID fraudsters who are going to use other things. So there isn't just one vector. We've seen it where we've had Mark has sent you a photograph. Please click this link. We're even seeing now a DSAR attack. So they're sending a phishing email. Hey, here's my DSAR. Please click this file. And people are doing it because it's a document. They're not looking at it. Because the attachment is actually an executable, a file that can install a piece of software. So you think you're dealing with a DSAR, and all of a sudden your system is being hacked because you've let them in. It's the old vampire at your door approach. Once you let them in, you're in trouble. If you train, technologically prevent, the vampire can't get in.
So let's expand a bit on that, because I think it's the most interesting and most innovative way nowadays for cyber perpetrators to steal credentials and steal information from computers.
Yeah.
So an organization receives a DSAR and it sounds like, hello, my name is Mr. Smith, whatever. please find attached my request or my proof of identity. Then the employee or maybe the DPO of the organization clicks that file without checking that it's an executable file or the type of file, the format, etc. Just clicks it, opens it, and perhaps there's a malicious software, right, that's installed on the computer and that gets access to everything on that computer in practice.
Absolutely. And it's not just a case of access to that computer. They could finish up having access to your whole network because they're getting in. They found a way to get in. And if your systems that you have in place are not adequate to prevent this kind of attack, so again, we come back to a technological attack as well as a human attack. So we call it the human firewall. Oh, hang on, this looks a little bit fishy. I'm not going to click on it. I've been trained to doubt it. So if there is just a simple one-line, hello, here is my DSAR request, that should cause thoughts. Hang on, this looks a bit suspicious. The email should, in theory, be saying, hello, I'm Mark, I'm Larissa. I'd like to exercise my rights, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
And please tell me what information I should supply. If they're supplying the information straight away, then straight away, to my mind, that's creating a risk. That's creating something which is suspicious. So again, we've got to take adequate measures.
Yes, but when we discuss about phishing attacks, can we expect phishing attacks from people that are impersonating our friends or other people that we know? Or is it always a phishing attack that's related to official authorities and public authorities in general?
No, and we've seen it. We've actually seen this impersonation of somebody. Hello, how are you? Great to see. And it happens a lot, and the crooks that are out there, they're technically very adept. So they expect human weakness. And then they're maximizing it. So when we make human errors, which we do, that gives them a better insight into how to get into our organizations. So, we're moving outside of the whole email as the threat in and of itself. And we're now talking of email as a tool to create a threat.
Yes.
Because the phishing attack is coming out, pretending to be your friend Sarah, pretending to be holiday snaps. And again, it's done through social media as well now. So we have to think. And again, we spoke about accountability a little while ago. We're back to accountability. And accountability to ourselves. What are we giving away that might ultimately allow us to get a phishing attack? And the other thing that we often mention is spear phishing. And a spear phishing email attack is a very particular kind of attack. And again, that's usually down to human weakness and human pride, giving information away that can lead the evil actors, the people behind the dark web, to get access in. So whilst we sometimes joke about phishing, we get sad, oh dear, I clicked that link, but I've stopped it, laughing and joking. It's quite serious stuff. And it is a big threat.
It is, but it can be addressed via training and having adequate training programs in place. How do you think training sits in this ecosystem of cybercrimes and protection and prevention for organizations?
I think the training creates that thing, the human firewall. It is actually the first line of defense. And often training gets pushed into the background. And it's only when something goes wrong, as we've seen, that we get called in to deliver the training. But the horse is already out of the field.
Yes.
It stopped being a preventative measure and being a mitigating measure. We should, and as we do, training is the first thing. Training. What is it all about? And it's all well and good training what the regulation says, which is what happens as we've seen from other sites. What we've got to do, we've got to train people how to act, how to recognize, and how to defend or defeat those threats, those email threats. So we do have things, whitelisting, blacklisting, that our IT team can do, and that can be effective. But as we've seen with phishing attacks, they can often be very clever.
Yes, and therefore, besides having training in place, we need procedures, we need policies, we need a whole framework that we can share with our employees. So have some clear and solid principles and standards throughout the organization. So they need to know step by step what to do when a cyber attack was identified, when a DSAR was submitted, etc. Because, for example, there could be a DSAR sent to the organization pretending to be one of the employees, let's say Stephen Smith, but then you notice the email address is Stephen Smith without the final H, and unless you paid enough attention, you may become the victim of a cyber attack in a second.
Absolutely. And a very simple mitigation there is make sure that you got your email client to show the full email address.
Yes.
It's all well and good just saying Stephen Smith, but look at the full email address, because that can be a very quick giveaway. Now, that doesn't mitigate if somebody's hacked an email account, which we've seen in the past. So when we spot those hacks, we've got to act very quickly. Lock the accounts down, change all the passwords, and then start activity again. We come back to time. Don't rush. Do it right. Make sure everything's in place. Make sure you test it, and then bring everything back up.
Yes, and our recommendation and our approach with all our clients is whenever you send an email, just double check everything from the email address to the attachments to the way you send the attachments. So perhaps having password protected files, and as you said, giving the password subsequently upon receiving the document from the recipient, etc. Having all these measures in place, having encryption, having antivirus software, it's a whole program, a whole framework of measures that need to be implemented.
Absolutely. If we look at business in general, just a business becomes a unit. Everybody has a different job. So if you don't have a salesman, you might have the best product in the world, but you can't sell anything.
Yes.
And cybersecurity and personal security and information security is the same thing. We all have to have a role and a responsibility so that we make sure that these things happen correctly.
And what about the discrepancy between having paper-based records and electronic records? Can we say having a data breach regarding electronic records is more impactful than the paper ones? Or can we say one is more valuable, more impactful, more risky, more dangerous than the other? So
one area where we do still see risk, and an awful lot of risk, is the storage of paper. Because quite often we archive our paper away, and then we forget about it, and it gets lost, it gets damaged. We've seen it with an estate agency that had stuff stored in a cellar, and the cellar flooded. So they could no longer, they still had the documents, but they can no longer recreate the content within those documents. So that in and of itself is a data breach, because they can't fulfill the rights and freedoms that data subjects have, the right of access, the right to be informed. So data, I always say, let's stop calling it data. Let's call it information, because that then encompasses everything. So we know that the information is both digital and analog, and both of those things have their own inherent threats. So we have to take mitigating measures. So if we're storing paper, have we got a copy of it? That's somewhere else. With our digital data, have we got a backup somewhere that's not within the same building? And it's the age of the cloud now. There's no excuse not to have it.
Yes, but legally speaking, the GDPR covers both types of records. So there's just no legal or reasonable in any way delineation between them two, as the GDPR prescribes rules for online services as well, for online communication platforms, etc.
Yeah.
So that's a myth. we can say they're equal, let's say, but having each other their own risks.
They both have their own inherent fragility. That inherent fragility leads to problems if we don't take steps and measures to make that fragility go away.
Absolutely. And the last point, Mark, I was thinking, let's try to sum up our conversation into having the top 5 tips that we can recommend to our audience. Mm-hmm. I would say the first one is to always double check the email address of your recipient and the attachments that you're sending.
Yeah.
Also, to have training packages in place.
Yeah. Absolutely.
What could you add to this?
So we talked about technology.
Yes.
And we talked about the business being like a unit. So we should be implementing technology across those risks. So the fact that we are human beings, we are prone to mistakes. We will be rushed. Our bosses are chasing us for delivery of the stuff. So installing the tools we talked about that will check before the email is sent with the attachment that's in the clear, that's a great step to prevent it. Training our people to give pause before they send emails and as part of their double checking exercise. Always have encryption available. Make sure your antivirus software and anti-malware software is up to date. Take that a stage further and actually have anti-data loss prevention stuff so that you've got a suite of protections. And those protections are important. They are not a solution on their own. We often get that argument, well, we've got this product. Well, that's great, but that only treats one risk. You have to treat all of those risks. So, and making sure that your security measures are up in place. Does everybody have to have full access to email? No, in reality. So why do they get it? Do they all have to have access to distribution labs? No, so don't give them access. Manage who has access as part of your security procedures. And that will go a long, long way to stopping email becoming a threat.
Absolutely. Thank you really much, Mark, for all your input in this podcast episode. Thank you for all our visitors today, our listeners. We are waiting for the next episodes to be posted. And if you want to reach out to us or if you have any other questions, you can find our details below in the description. Thank you very much.